Okay, it is 7 o'clock. We'll start our meeting. Our presenter tonight is Mika Geiger, and she'll be presenting on Under the Lens, Insects, Plants, and Their Captivating Shared World. But before that, we've got some slides to go through. Oh, come on. Arrow. Hey, there we go. I am just going to tap the mouse pad and we'll get through that. No need for a remote control. So tonight's plants, as apparently, well, we won't talk about tonight's plants anymore because you all have them, but they were great.
There are a couple back there, rescued post German.
Okay, we do have a couple of, oh, yes, some coast germanders have been brought in from a plant rescue. So rescued coast germanders are back there. The ones up on the screen are gone. So for those of you that are home, when you do come early, okay? And the QR code up there is for Wilkoscape. So whether you're here or there, that is our resource for looking up information on plants that will do well in Williamson County. Please give it a shot when you go shopping next time. Our native plant sale is coming up March 28th, but there's a slide later on for that, so I won't mention it now. I'll mention it in 2 slides. Upcoming programs. This is what we have on tap through May. And I think maybe June has been locked in. There may have been an email recently about that. But if you have ideas for speakers, please do get in touch with Susie Hickman, who coordinates and does a wonderful job with our programming. So thank you, Susie. Field trips, upcoming field trips. For March, it's the Galt site. April 11th is going to be at the Brushy Creek Trail, the Fern Bluff segment again. That was the New Year's trip, the New Year's Day trip, but we'll see it a little more lively this time. And then May 2nd, ACC Highland. So I know maybe on our website today or on the blog, they posted something about the Galt site. There's homework to do. There's a link to the PBS presentation on the Galt site and the archaeological, anthropological history there. So neat stuff to go see that area of historical significance. And some plants there too. Our latest field trip was, why, just this past weekend, though it seems so long ago. We went out to the Peterson Community Garden, and there are about 20 of us NIPSOT members, as well as Keep Hutto Beautiful members out there. Or if you listen to the Google Maps on the drive out, Hutto. So that was fun to listen to. So there's the Monarch Way Station there, and if you look back in the far left corner, you will see the historical agricultural equipment, various tractor type things and stuff that I can't speak on because I know nothing, but it was neat to see a fun bunch of folks to do weeding with and then socialize with afterwards. So really nice time was had by all, or at least by me, and that's all that matters. So yeah. Uh, yeah, our spring plant sale, March 28th. So start thinking about plants that you want. And we're going to have our plant list posted closer to our sale date. So check out Wilkoscape, do your homework, see what neat things will work for you in your landscape. And if you'd like to volunteer, then you can start emailing and letting us know that you'd like to volunteer. Oh my gosh, yeah, that's coming up. Okay. Hey, our latest Williamson County Landfill Pollinator Garden Workday is coming up February 15th. So another fun time to do some weeding and work with people out at the landfill. So, and Pluto, yes. And just something to keep in mind, registration closes February 22nd for the spring symposium. It's full.
In person is full.
In person is full. Latest news, in person is full, but you can still attend the virtual meeting. So yeah, so there we go. Attendees at tonight's meeting will win this book. It is here in its wrapper, unread. Okay, so it is waiting for you. Hopefully you picked up your ticket in the back so you can be eligible for this book if you're here in person. All right. Okay, that's us. Subscribe to our blog and get updates. Always take notice of the location, which I forgot to look at on the previous slides. But I think we're here for the next few months. So just keep coming here. You'll be all right until we're not here, and then we'll be somewhere else. So we are ready for our presentation. Again, Mika Geiger, Under the Lens, Insect Plants and Their Captivating Shared World. Mika is a macro photographer based in Austin, Texas, whose work focuses on the often overlooked lives of insects. Through close-up images and quiet moments in the field, she invites people to slow down and see these tiny creatures with curiosity and amazement. Mika is a Texas master naturalist and volunteers with projects such as native bee monitoring and the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center Fauna Survey. Mika's photography spotlights the vital roles insects play in our ecosystems. So, tonight's speaker.
Well, thank you for having me tonight. I'm really sorry that I wasn't there in person because I was looking forward to meeting all of you, but cedar fever basically got the better of me. So hopefully my voice will behave. But thank you for joining me, and I look forward to showing you the small world I see through my lens. I spend a lot of time crawling around taking photographs of insects, which isn't something I had planned on doing. I was actually doing other types of photography before, but during the pandemic, I found myself spending hours on the trails with our dogs. That's Casper and Cinco there. And we often stayed out way longer than we had planned. It brought me peace, though. And after a while, I started bringing along a macro lens I had never really gotten around to using. It's kind of like putting a magnifying glass on your camera. And suddenly, all the small things didn't seem so small. At first, I photographed the details of flowers. And then one day, I came across a small brown moth. If I'm being honest, I almost walked right by her. She was a smudge, pretty ordinary looking, but I needed practice on insects that didn't move too fast, and she fit the bill. But through the macro lens, I tell you, she wasn't plain at all. Looking back at me was a princess with braids and a cape. And at that moment, something shifted for me. I realized, though, that the photograph wasn't the end. It was just the beginning because I went home with so many questions. What type of moth is this? Why does it have such long antennae? How can you tell if a moth is sleeping? And is it a princess or maybe a prince? From then on, I couldn't wait to see what every insect looked like. And I also wanted to find out their story. Over time, plants stopped being simply the background in my photos. They became places where insects' lives unfold. And it wasn't long before I started to realize it was rarely just one life on a plant. When you slow down enough to look, an entire world begins to appear. This is a buttonbush bloom. At first glance, you might notice one visitor, but stay with it a moment and more begin to emerge. A single plant can hold many lives at once, each shaped in its own way, each interacting with the plant differently. So let's take a closer look at some of the visitors, insects that help move pollen. Butterflies are the first to catch our attention. They're bright, slow moving, drifting easily from bloom to bloom. But when one settles on a flower, you begin to see the mechanics, that long proboscis uncoiling as it reaches for nectar, And while it feeds, pollen gathers quietly on its legs and mouth parts, traveling with it to the next bloom. This checkered white butterfly flew away, dusted in gold. Butterflies are beautiful, familiar, but only part of the story. If butterflies are the daytime ambassadors of pollination, maybe moths are their quieter counterpoints. Most moths work the night shift, visiting pale, often fragrant flowers that are open after dusk. Nocturnal moths are usually softly colored, built to disappear among leaves, shadows, and sometimes tree bark while they rest during the day. The sad underwing moth, I don't think I would have spotted it if I hadn't seen her from her profile. And then there are moths that fly in full daylight, which is something I hadn't realized when I started this journey. In daylight, being seen while they fly is part of a risk, though. So some rely on bold colors or actually mimic the look of a stinging insect. This aptly named Texas wasp moth is hoping that that look alone will make predators think twice. Other daytime flying moths survive through sheer flight ability. Sphinx moths, like this white line sphinx moth, are incredibly agile, hovering, darting, changing direction in an instant as they feed. Watching them often feels more like watching a hummingbird than an insect. And flies are a group of pollinators that often go unnoticed on flowers. But after bees, flies move more pollen than almost any other insect. You'll find them arriving when bees stay put, which is important, like on cool mornings in early spring, even in shaded places. While some do visit decaying matter, many are just at home on flowers, sipping nectar, and there's a remarkable variety here among flies. Some wear convincing disguises, mimicking the looks of bees or wasps, like this soldier fly. To me, looks so much like a bee. Another mimic, hoverflies, and they're excellent pollinators. A single hoverfly will visit dozens of flowers in a day. They hover, land, dart from bloom to bloom, and pollen sticks to the fine hair on their bodies as they go. You may have noticed these little guys on a trail in front of you. A little guy will jump in front of your face and then hover there, and as soon as you look at him, it will dart away and then reappear. And some hoverfly larvae quietly help gardeners. Many feed on aphids. And then there are bee flies. They're one of my favorites to watch. Many look like fuzzy bees, but once you watch them in flight, that illusion disappears. They're pretty clumsy in the air, legs sprawled, flight uneven. Honestly, they're so comical to watch. The adults are pollinators, feeding on nectar, but their story doesn't end at the flower. The female bee flies will flick their eggs into the nests of solitary bees, where the larvae eat the stored pollen, and sometimes the bee larvae themselves. Different bodies, different approaches, all have their own way to transfer pollen. Then there are beetles. Beetles, like these two neighbors on spiderwort blooms, are among the oldest pollinators, around long before bees and butterflies. Some of the earliest flowers evolved right alongside the beetles. They were built sturdy enough to handle insects that chew rather than only sip. When I began photographing them, I started to notice how many forms beetle can take, like this milkweed beetle who seems to be searching for milkweed, an iridescent metallic blister beetle, and this ridiculously longhorn Bumelia borer beetle, who we came across while it was taking a sip of sweet nectar, a sweet sap that was oozing from a tree. Many aren't after nectar. They're here for pollen, which is a source of protein, some munching on petals as they go. And if you like to eat other insects like this lady beetle and red cross beetle. They don't sip and leave, they chew, they linger, they're messy pollinators. As these flower scarabs move through a prickly pear bloom, pollen coats their bodies, legs, undersides, even their wing covers. And when they move on, they carry that pollen with them. Beetles aren't delicate pollinators, but they get the job done. Wasps are pollinators too, and they visit flowers. Paper wasps, I know, aren't a popular example, but they're very familiar amongst the flowers. They scrape weathered wood and plant fibers, mix those with saliva, and build those beautiful suspended nests. Their homes begin with plants. Wasps arrive quietly, sip nectar, and move on. I think there's a quiet elegance to the way the wasps move among the flowers. Many solitary wasps sip nectar as adults, but to provision for the next generation, the female hunts. She'll capture a prey, paralyze it, and then she'll seal it in a chamber with a single egg. The wasp larva feeds in a way that keeps the insect alive as long as possible. It will save the vitals for last, and this way the meal will last until the larva is fully developed and ready to emerge. And different solitary wasp species have particular taste. This bold beauty hunts tarantulas for her young, and this wasp hunts weevils. She is a stink bug hunter, and this iridescent blue beauty is digging a nursery that will contain cockroaches for her larva to live on. It's precise work, it's demanding work, and it all unfolds around the plants we're standing beside. Most pollinators we've talked about so far, they pick up pollen accidentally while they're visiting flowers for various purposes. But bees actively collect pollen and nectar for a purpose. When many of us picture a bee, it probably looks something like this: our native fuzzy bumblebee that we often see. But native bees don't share a single look. Some native bees are so small you could easily miss them, like these sweat bees sharing the bloom with a much larger honeybee. And the honeybees aren't native to North America. Some are robust, like this carpenter bee that's built for boring into wood. Many shimmer, like this green metallic sweat bee. And others, like male longhorn bees, have long antennae to help them find mates. And every once in a while, a detail just makes me smile, like that little tuft of hair on this mason bee. I always think it looks like a mohawk. Bees don't all carry pollen the same way. The bumblebee is packing pollen into baskets on her legs to bring it back to the colony. And it looks like she's had a good day gathering. That basket is very full. Many native bees, though, have special hairs that trap pollen, often on their legs. And others, like this leafcutter bee, carry it along their abdomen. The leafcutter bees, they'll sort of like tap their butts down on the flower to pick up the pollen. And then when their load is full, they'll keep their abdomen up so they don't lose the pollen again. It's easy to picture bees as part of a colony, like our bumblebees. But most native bees, like this one, live solitary lives. There is no hive, no queen. Each female builds her own nursery, gathers pollen, lays a single egg with a little loaf that she makes out of pollen and nectar, and then she seals the chamber. And then she does this again and again, building a series of chambers, each prepared for a single life. She will never meet her offspring, but she's already given them everything they need. Many solitary bees, they'll dig their nest in the ground like this one. I watched this digger bee methodically excavating her tunnel on a sandy trail. Grain by grain, she kicked soil backward as she disappeared beneath the surface. All of that effort for a nursery hidden beneath our feet. Others use hollow, pithy plant stems like this frostweed, or they use existing tunnels like this one behind the leafcutter bee. I spotted her in a garden bed. She would fly off, cut leaves into circles, and then return to her nursery entrance, dragging the leaves inside to build and separate each chamber. Just a small piece of plant protecting the next generation. While leafcutter bees use leaves, other solitary bees will use other material like soil or mud. Most native bees aren't picky feeders, and they'll visit a variety of flowering plants as they gather pollen. But for some bees, not any flower will do. These are specialists. They'll rely on a very small group of plants for pollen, sometimes just one. Squash bees are a wonderful example. Their entire life cycle is tied to squash and pumpkin plants. They emerge as the flower begins to open, and their days follow the rhythm of those blooms. Look inside a squash flower early in the morning, and you might find one already there, sometimes feeding, sometimes resting, sometimes bottom up, completely dusted in pollen. For a squash bee, the flower isn't just a place to gather food, it's often a place to spend the night. And squash bees aren't the only ones living this closely with a plant. I was hiking in Big Bend National Park one time and I heard this intense buzzing up ahead. And then I came upon this source. It was a patch of narrow leaf globe mallows and it was alive with pollinators. Many of the pollinators were these blue eyed mallow bees, perfectly shaped to disappear inside the blooms. And while I was photographing this blue eyed globe mallow bee, a small plant bug crept closer as if to try to figure out what I was doing. Wine cups belong to the same plant family as globe mallows, and these wine cup chimney bees are even more tightly tied to them. I often find them tucked inside the wine cup blooms after a light rain, drying the rings as they continue to feed. And some bees seek resources beyond pollen and nectar. Centrist bees, like this one here, collect floral oils produced only by certain plants, and they'll use them to waterproof and also provision their nest. They'll actually mix some of that oil with pollen to make a food source for their larvae. And while this one is visiting a pyramid bush for nectar, it gathers oils from plants like rhatany that will help protect the next generation. It's another reminder that flowers aren't offering just one thing, they're guiding relationships in very specific ways. At some point in the field, I stopped immediately lifting my camera when I saw an insect and chasing it with my lens. Instead, I started sitting and watching. How does an insect approach a flower? Does it hover first? Does it land and leave in seconds? Or does it dive straight in? The more I watch, the more I realize something important. Flowers aren't completely passive. They're shaping what happens to a certain extent. Some flowers guide insects in with subtle visual cues, faint lines and patterns like the ones on this horseman bee balm that function almost like runway lights. This bumblebee is coming in for a landing, all prepared with her tongue sticking out. And these markings, like the ones on the sage, they lead visitors exactly where the flower needs them to go. Sage is also an example of a flower that takes it a step further. When a bee grasps or steps on that lower petal to reach the nectar, the flower actually moves. That upper one will come out and the stamens pivot downward and gently taps pollen onto the bee's back or head. The contact isn't accidental, it feels engineered, and the pollen ends up exactly where it needs to be when the bee visits the next sage. Some flowers position their pollen where a visitor can't avoid it. The blue pollen from this clammy weed almost paints the bee. Clammy weeds are one of my favorites to see under the macro lens, just all that blue pollen and the incredible parts of the flower. Buttonbush is similar. It gathers its stamens so tightly that contact becomes constant. This bumblebee's long tongue reaches so far down it disappears into the flower, and before long, her body is dusted in pollen. But not every bee fits a flower the same way. While some bees, like bumblebees, have long tongues, others, like this carpenter bee, have short tongues. And when they can't reach the nectar the conventional way, they'll sometimes make a hole in the petal right at the nectar source, leaving the pollen behind. It's something that's called nectar robbing. One thing I started noticing through my macro lens is that pollen isn't all built the same. Some flowers, like pink evening primrose, have pollen that just clings in long, sticky strands. As an insect like this native bee works its way across the flower, strings of pollen get stuck on its legs. And even eyes, leaving clean isn't really an option. As bees fly, I was amazed to learn this. Their bodies actually build a small static charge, and the pollen responds. It lifts, it clings, coating the bee before it ever leaves the flower. Texas sage, with its fine powdery pollen, makes this especially easy to see. Pollen just coats everything. This bee is so covered, it's hard to even tell that it's a honey bee. Rock rose pollen, it's heavy, it's sticky, it's abundant, it's insane. A bee reaching for nectar pushes straight through the pollen, emerging coated, sometimes so completely that even the eyes disappear beneath it. Honeybees actually have hairy eyes, so pollen sticks to their eyes very well. This honeybee is having to make a blind landing. And it isn't just bees, hoverflies, plant bugs, even weevils, anyone moving through these blooms carry pollen away. Contact becomes unavoidable. And then there are some flowers, like the silverleaf nightshade, that hold their pollen more tightly. For these plants, contact isn't enough to loosen the pollen. The pollen has to be shaken loose. Certain bees have evolved to do this by vibrating their flight muscles. It's something that's called buzz pollination, and it releases the pollen in a soft burst. Their whole bodies vibrate, and you can actually hear the buzzing. It's a different type of buzzing from the normal flight sound. Bumblebees are especially well known for this, but they aren't the only ones. Before long, I started seeing smaller bees, like this green sweat bee, doing the same, gripping the anthers and vibrating to free the pollen. Many native plants, crops even like tomatoes, peppers, and eggplant, rely on this kind of pollination. And pollination is something that honeybees aren't able to do. Sometimes a photograph for me will raise more questions than answers. In one of my photos, I noticed this honeybee with these little yellow structures attached to her leg. I don't know if you can see my cursor. I wasn't quite sure what I was seeing. I went home full of questions. I started researching bees with growths on their legs, bees with parasites, mites. But the next time I came across a bee with these same little things on her leg, it was on a milkweed again. And that's when it clicked. Maybe these were coming from the flower. And that made my research a whole lot easier. I learned that milkweed doesn't release loose pollen. It packages it into these small packet that keeps them tucked away in tiny slits. And when an insect steps on the flower to reach the nectar, the hope is that its foot can slip into a narrow opening and one of those pollen packets can fasten on, almost like a tiny clip. But for pollination to work, that insect has to visit another milkweed, and that same foot has to slip into another opening like it. This guy's a carpenter bee, by the way. It's an elaborate system that depends a lot on chance, and it isn't without risk. Legs can become trapped. Insects sometimes struggle to pull free, and occasionally they don't. But flowers don't just attract pollinators. While this honeybee came to forage for pollen and nectar, other insects have different tastes. This ambush bug, known as a bee assassin, although it doesn't only hunt bees, blends in well with the antelope horn milkweed. These pollen packets will never be delivered. Crab spiders are masters of blending in and waiting patiently without moving. Some species can even shift their color slightly to match their color they're hunting on. This one on a buttonbush bloom is nearly invisible. I still wonder if the bee noticed it. And plants aren't just places to feed, they also make great lookout spots. I often find a neon skimmer dragonfly perched above a small pond at the Ladybird Johnson Wildflower Center, keeping watch over the airspace, ready to intercept insects mid flight. Why it's always a neon skimmer, I don't know, but it usually is. I sat and watched this robber fly one day for several minutes as she stood looking out from her perch. Like dragonflies, robber flies are incredibly fast and accurate at catching insects as they fly. Suddenly, she launched and grabbed something out of the air. When I finally tracked her down to where she landed, I found her just casually hanging by one leg as she fed on a bee. Even without perfect camouflage, this cute young mantis tucked beneath the purple cone flower petals is hidden from visitors above. She waits patiently for something to drift within reach. But in the insect world, roles can shift quickly. Even skilled hunters become part of the food web. Size alone does not guarantee safety out there. This green-link spider somehow managed to capture another hunter, a large dragonfly. I didn't see her capture it, and I'm really curious how that went down. And then there are some predators that take a different path entirely. Rather than building a nursery for their young, like some of the other solitary wasps we looked at earlier, parasitoid wasps skip the nursery building. They lay their eggs on or inside another insect. That long filament you see, it's her egg-laying organ called an ovipositor. She's using it to place an egg in an insect that's concealed within the bloom. And when the larvae hatch, their survival depends on eating the host. Those small yellow oblong shapes you see on this caterpillar are wasp eggs, more lives already underway. And as cruel as it seems, the parasitoid wasps do help regulate the insect populations, including many that feed on plants. As I spent more time watching flowers, I began to notice something else there. Insects weren't just feeding, they were finding mates. I've often noticed that while mating, the female will just continue to feed while the male simply holds on. It looks a little awkward, but it works, I guess. Two bodies or more moving together across a bloom means more contact and the greater chance that pollen moves on. A flower becomes more than a food source, it becomes a place where the next generation begins. For many insects, life begins on a plant. I've come across lacewing eggs before, a few here, a few there, but these made me stop in my tracks, nearly symmetrical, perfectly suspended, and along the spine of a prickly pear cactus. Each egg is placed at the end of a long filament, helping keep the newly hatched larvae from eating each other when they emerge with a very good appetite. And what emerges from these eggs may not be what you expect. As they develop, some species of lacewing larvae, nicknamed junk bugs, they'll pick up debris, plant fragments, even bits of dead insects, and stack them on their backs. This disguise can help them get closer to insects that they love to eat, like aphids, without being detected. It's hard to imagine they turn into these delicate lacewings that love to sip nectar. Growth in the insect world can also mean leaving the old you behind. To grow, an insect has to shed the body it's outgrown, often changing color along the way. Aztec grasshoppers, like this one here, starts life in bold, striking colors, but with each molt, they become more muted, better able to blend in. And not our larvae look the way we imagine. The familiar ladybug begins life like this, already a predator feeding on garden pests. And I thought this was a mealybug at first, but to my surprise, it's also a larva of a different type of lady beetle. And it's called the mealybug destroyer. It closely resembles a mealybug, helping it move along them unnoticed as it hunts mealybugs and other small soft body insects. One morning I was walking on the trail when I noticed ants moving up and down the stems of some sunflowers. Anytime I see ants on a plant, I usually take a closer look. Often when ants gather on a plant, it has something to do with aphids. So that's what I assumed I was going to see here. But when I leaned in, I realized that these weren't aphids at all. They were actually tree hopper nymphs feeding on the plant's sap. The ants were gently tapping them with their antenna, sort of massaging them, encouraging the tree hopper nymphs to secrete a sugary droplet that ants love to eat. As the tree hoppers fed on the sunflower, the ants feed on the honeydew from the tree hopper nymphs. And in return, the ants protect them from predators. They'll even sometimes move the tree hoppers to a better feeding spot so they can get more honeydew. I was actually surprised to find an ant milking honeydew from a mature tree hopper in this section. About a year later, I stopped to see what a couple of ants were up to on a puffy bloom of golden bell lead bowl tree, and found out they were coaxing honeydew from a Rickert's blue caterpillar. There was a year that my backyard filled with looked like a cloud of tiny movement. Minute insects were drifting through the air, too small to see clearly with my eyes. So I began tracking them down to see where they landed and taking photos of them. And they were tiny, itsy bitsy wasps. Some appeared to be keeping a lookout, and many, I mean many, were mating. And occasionally these wasps were becoming prey. Curious to understand what I was seeing, I reviewed my photos on iNaturalist, which I use a lot, and learned that these were live oak gall wasps. their activity tracing back to our live oak trees. What looks like part of the leaf is actually the tree responding to the insect. When a tiny gall wasp lays an egg, the oak leaf grows around it, forming that little sphere that feeds and protects the developing larva. From a distance, it looks like it might be part of the tree, but once you notice them, you'll start seeing them frequently. You may have seen this before, a line of ants moving steadily across the ground, each carrying a piece of leaf. I remember lowering myself to the ground to watch, drawn in by the movement. I don't know if you can see there are two ants in this. There is one that's sort of hidden behind the green leaf. There was a steady flow unfolding across the soil, ants traveling in both directions, carrying fragments of vegetation many times their size, others returning empty, the exchange continuous. The longer I watched, the clearer it became that there was far more happening than what was visible on the surface. At first glance, it might look like simple foraging, and maybe we should thank this one for carrying away an ash juniper berry. But leafcutter ants don't eat the material they carry. They use it to cultivate a fungus that feeds the entire colony. Everything moving across the ground is supporting a world below. Just beneath the surface is the colony itself, mostly hidden, but organizing everything that happens. A single colony can contain millions of ants, each contributing to a system far larger than any individual. At one point, I noticed an ant carrying a leaf and it was struggling to navigate over a small plant. To my surprise, ants nearby actually paused and guided it over the obstacle. Watching them, I became aware that this steady exchange wasn't rigid, it could adapt. No single ant was directing this, yet the system kept working. The longer I watched, the larger it all began to feel. And sometimes it all comes back to the flower. When you look closely at a passion flower, it almost feels like an amusement park ride. There's nectar here, structures there, movement everywhere. Insects like this hairless bee fly land on petals, the filaments, the anthers. Some sip, some explore, some linger. And size matters in this case. Smaller bees like this honeybee have to work hard to reach the pollen. Larger bees, though, like bumblebees, and especially carpenter bees, brush exactly where the plant needs them to. The pollen ends up on their backs and heads, right where the flower will receive it. It's a quiet reminder that these encounters aren't random, they're shaped by fit. I didn't always move through the world this way. There was a time when I walked past plants without noticing much at all. An insect would fly by and I'd chew it away with my hand without thinking twice. But then I started slowing down, looking closer, following movement. Now, when I pass a plant, I can't help but wonder what's unfolding there. Who is arriving? Who is feeding? Who is depending on it? And who might be hidden just out of view? What once found felt like a quiet landscape now feels alive with interaction, not because the world changed, but because I learned how to see it. And thank you. That's it. Here's my contact information. I love staying in touch with people. And if you ever are curious about anything or want to discuss, please reach out to me.
And we're going to say goodnight to our online viewership as well. Thank you all for joining us and hope to see you next time as well. Thank you all.